Path of Exile 2 felt like a clean slate from the very first day of its announcement, an opportunity to begin anew without worrying about things like linking, adding, or recoloring sockets. Depending on who you ask, it's become something more from, quote, the one true ARPG king to an opportunity to dunk on Blizzard's Diablo 4 at every opportunity. Now that it's finally out in early access across all platforms, what's the verdict? Well, Path of Exile 2 is indeed the best action RPG available right now. Its campaign is a fine mix of macabre and dark fantasy, tiptoeing on the edge of despair while offering incredible moments of adventure and levity. The environments are striking and unique, presenting twists of your standard cursed forests, desert plains, and overwhelming jungles. The combat is organic, with the most freedom of choice and customization ever seen in the action RPG genre, second only to the first game. Some design decisions and irritating bugs hold it back from truly achieving greatness, but make no mistake, for fans, this is the start of your new obsession, and it's beautiful. Picking up 100 years after the first game's events, invasion of eldritch entities in the endgame notwithstanding, Path of Exile 2 sees Rayclast plunged into darkness once more after the court of Ogham discovers the seed of corruption. Seduced and driven mad by its power, he feeds it, causing corruption to spread throughout the land and creating what becomes known as the Beast. Of course, you're nobody when this all starts, little more than a prisoner on death's row, waiting to be hanged by the court in the most darkly creative class selection screen of all time. After escaping and making your way to the Clearfell settlement, composed of refugees from the razed village, your journey begins. Most action RPG looter narratives are throwaway in the long run. The original Path of Exile did a good job presenting unique battles and twists in its story without bogging down the pacing, but the sequel does even better. Outside of the incredible opening cinematic, much of the plot is intertwined with your tasks, often leading to new areas and discoveries. Act 1 is fairly linear, yet everything follows a logical progression, backed by strong voice acting and characterization, both for the NPCs of Clearfell and some of the bosses encountered. Act 2 is where the formula is somewhat thrown to the desert winds, as you join the Ardura caravan and select locations to investigate. Act 3 is more in line with the first, but offers even more optional tasks and challenges to pursue. It has some other unique elements, including perhaps the best character in the entire story. The zones retain the randomness of the first game, meaning one tomb entrance or point of interest could be at an entirely different point. Besides some genuinely gorgeous and imaginative details, they also possess some optional bosses which can net some permanent boosts to your character, like increased HP, spirit, resistances, and more. Then you have the side quests, which encourage traveling to non-essential zones to wipe out other threats. It's nothing that you haven't seen from objectives in other action RPGs, but the environments offer enough nuance in their layouts. The hazards, choke points, and different elevations also keep things dynamic, and not in the press a button to climb up then slide back down kind of way, as do the variety of enemies. Grinding Gear Games touts 400 different types, and they're certainly a motley bunch, from your emaciated wolves and spellslingers to river hags casting screen-warping whirlpools that eventually kill you. Even what should be the run-of-the-mill human fodder can vary significantly depending on the region, from slow, shuffling zombies to acrobatic soldiers who dodge from side to side when they're not pinning you down with rope arrows. They're a blast to fight, especially when rare enemies are thrown into the mix. Their unique modifiers necessitate some change in strategy. While I appreciate things like temporal proximity, where moving further away reduces your chances to hit, some modifiers are just a pain to deal with. Siphoning mana, for example, pretty much hinders your ability to attack, especially if you're playing a sorceress like I was. The solution is simple: stay outside their aura, but it's made all the more annoying when the enemy moves as fast as you do. The other issue is how easily you can be pushed around by enemies. The loading screen tips warn of larger monsters doing this, but it should really say that every monster type, regardless of size and things like gravity, can push you around. It's all the more egregious when they push each other, making it much easier to become swamped and suffer a quick death, especially when you can't roll through. The new checkpoint system, which is great for bosses, comes under fire as a result since you need to clear out all of those enemies again. Some bosses suffer from the same issue. One rolled me into a corner where I became stuck, thus resulting in an awkward face-off and constant potion mashing to stay alive before escaping. However, the boss fights as a whole are spectacular. I could tell you about Torgal the Defiler, slamming its giant skeletal body into an arena and breathing fire, or Zalmarath the Colossus, with his lasers and giant stone sword. Yet even the smaller, more grounded foes present worthy challenges, like Blackjaw, who wields a massive axe, slamming the ground with a hitbox that admittedly made me want to scream, and launching flaming slices. These aren't even the best fights in the game, that's just how high the bar is. It can get to be a bit much for some players, especially when multiple spells and effects are going, but almost every boss is excellent. This brings us to the absolute highlight of Path of Exile 2, the combat. Admittedly, it starts pretty simple with a few basic abilities, a dodge roll and a dream. However, the interplay between the mechanics is something to behold. I played as Sorceress for over 51 hours and started by slinging all kinds of elements. A firewall here and there, firing frost bolts through it, setting them ablaze for extra fire damage, combined with the odd solar orb. Eventually, I moved to Arc and Conductivity to curse enemies with lower lightning resistance. Now, my current build involves creating extensive ice walls, hitting them with a firestorm, which thus deals damage to enemies nearby, and building up freeze, and using Winter Orb to remove the status for more damage, at the cost of it building up freeze. Anything frozen also contributes to Cast on Freeze, which I've linked Comet and Lightning Conduit to, thus killing off smaller foes immediately. Orb of Storms is there for moral support, more often than not. Thanks to my Stormweaver Ascendancy, any critical hits with the spells trigger an elemental storm, which can deal lightning, cold, or fire damage. This is only one example of a build, and I've shuffled around support gems, allocated or deallocated passives, and embraced only one unique item, more spell damage per 10 spirit. You can even set up a dual passive tree, which allows for equipping another weapon corresponding to its own passives on the fly for a different playstyle. The sheer number of directions to go is mind-boggling. Want more critical hit chance to trigger Elemental Storm? More freeze buildup for Cast on Freeze? What about passives for penetrating resistances to free up a support gem slot or two? How do I address my high mana costs? As the build twisted and warped into something unexpected, it presented a fun challenge to tweak things and account for cast speed, resistances, evasion, stun thresholds, and the list just goes on. This is one of the game's strengths, easy enough to get into and gradually ramping up in complexity, allowing you to freely link support gems without worrying about whether you have the right socket color or amount is liberating. While you can eventually link 5 support gems to a skill, each skill starts with only 2 slots. It wasn't something I necessarily hated, but throughout my entire time on normal and cruel difficulty, I received one single orb to add another socket. Did I need more to clear the story? No, but at the very least it would have been nice to have more during the end game, especially given the amount of skills to add slots to. Speaking of the endgame, I've only scratched the surface, venturing to a few lost towers and yet to tackle my first burning monolith. Nevertheless, this new direction of infinitely extending nodes with different pathways to reach sites of interest is pretty fascinating, especially with all of the extra mechanics like strongboxes, delirium, etc. The catch is that dying on a map essentially closes it off, which means deploying a new waystone to clear the node. You still make progress, and the drop rate of waystones is enough to sustain that, but considering some of the bonuses that those activities can provide, it is a bummer to miss out when making one mistake. On the flip side, it makes maps feel that much more important, and for you to consider your build and the modifiers before committing Unga Bunga. Though crafting is its own intricate system in the first game, Path of Exile 2 takes a surprisingly more streamlined approach. Use currency to augment magic items or upgrade them to rares. Slam with exalts for more modifiers, or use a chaos orb to remove a random modifier and add another. If you're feeling saucy, corrupt an item to warp it in unknown ways with Vol orbs, which can be applied to pretty much everything, though be wary as they can just as easily brick your items. Artificer orbs add rune slots to armor and weapons, which add different effects like increased resistances, elemental damage, defensive stats, and much more. Other than the salvage and reforge benches, the latter requiring 3 items of a similar type to combine into one brand new item, the crafting is pared down. Granted, the developer could very well add a dedicated bench for those classic guaranteed modifiers and whatnot, but for now, the system works well enough, even with the RNG. Now, if only there was a currency to re-roll modifiers on magic items instead of dumping them, because one of the 2 stats feels like a waste. Barring a few design decisions and some gameplay issues, Path of Exile 2 is fantastic. However, it suffers from significant bugs which can drag down the experience. Some make you go, well, that's so early access, like fish that continue swimming in place despite a waterway being drained. Others are downright annoying, like a boss that returned to its starting spot because I moved out of its arena during a fight and became soft-locked, instantly regenerating its health and constantly summoning enemies. There was no other recourse than to wait for that instance to reset and hope that it didn't happen again. Then you have the major bugs, like self-casting lightning conduit and getting disconnected from the game, which is separate from the other disconnects that can occur. Unusually high RAM usage would occur at times, prompting a restart. Also, after a 52GB patch, I found several of my equipped skill and support gems gone. Retrieving the skills didn't take long thanks to gems dropping at a decent rate, with the new systems ensuring that they're immediately brought to the highest level depending on progress. However, since support gems were rarer, it took longer to get those back, making for a needless hurdle towards the end of Cruel difficulty. At least the overall performance was solid on PC throughout. Even with all of these issues in mind, Path of Exile 2 still comes highly recommended. There's so much that Grinding Gear Games gets right, and it's so refreshing to sink so many hours into an action RPG that doesn't insult my intelligence with menial progression and the illusion of choice. With more time and polish, I'm confident that it'll become a benchmark for the genre. In the meantime, it'll have to settle for being one of the best and showing the competition how it's done.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at Gaming Vault, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.